So good morning, everyone. I am Jessie Whittish with Kentucky Youth Advocates, and I am really happy to be here with all of you this morning and really excited to hear from our panelists around caring for and working with kids who've experienced trauma. Just a little housekeeping. As a reminder, we are recording today's forum to share as both a recording, like a video, and as a podcast. So we do ask that you stay muted, but if you have questions or comments, want to add anything to what panelists are saying, please drop that into the chat. I know this is a curious crew of folks, and also many of you have expertise in this field. So please drop that into the chat, and we'll answer questions as best we can. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry Brooks.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jessie, and welcome to KYA's Virtual Partner Forum number 52. So we are now at 52 weeks of these, and we, as always, appreciate everyone who is taking time to join us today. In answer to Jessie's very important policy question, I see my KYA colleague, Zach Russell, on here, and Zach and I share a commitment that there is nothing that you cannot barbecue. And I'm just telling you, I bet cicadas fit into that. So, maybe next week we can do a little barbecued cicada meal review. So I want to open by maybe making some of you actually hacked at me. Some of you may disagree with me, but I hope you think about this. The Lake Superior State University in Michigan puts out for the last quarter of a century each year a list of phrases that have been used so much that they have lost their meaning in the last 12 months. So the leading phrases in 2020, which Lake Superior State University, not Terry Brooks, believes have been said so often by so many they don't mean anything, here they are. We are all in this together, out of an abundance of caution. In these uncertain times, in these unprecedented times, we're pivoting. The quarantine hustle. I know, right? The list goes on. I won't read all 30, but you get the flow. So I've got to tell you, I have begun to worry a little bit that trauma has become that kind of word. 3 or 4 years ago, I'm not talking about people on this call because y'all are in the gifted and talented class for trauma. But in general, people didn't use that word when it related to kids and the kind of emotional, mental supports that we're talking about. But in case you haven't paid attention, now everybody is using it about everything. And I think as an advocacy community, it is really, really important that we start tying down specifics, that we animate that phrase, that we make people think about that phrase, whether those folks are in schools or health facilities, faith communities, or the General Assembly. And I think you're going to see over the next several weeks, that's going to become a prominent theme with these forums, beginning this week when we talk about parenting. Next week, again, I don't want to bury the lead, but we're really going to focus on the trauma-informed plans that every school system is required to submit by July 1. Additionally, as the summer rolls on, we're going to be paying attention to the efforts of schools around trauma as kids go back. We're going to be focusing on 2022 policies that are specifically related to trauma. So this is an important kind of kickoff to that theme for the summer. The thing that I would invite you to let us hear from you, to think about is how do we make sure that this very, very important topic, very important topic doesn't become talked about so much by so many that it loses its punch. So that's my challenge today. And we've got a great panel to turn that curve, get specific, and think about what in the world are you going to do with kids over the summer. Cortney Downs, take it away.
All right, thank you, Terry. I think that's a perfect opener too for this really important conversation. And I'm really excited to hear from this panel. So I want to give actually each of you like 30 seconds to introduce yourselves. Just tell us a little bit about where you work and what your current role is. Samantha, do you want to start?
Absolutely. So I'm Samantha Behmke, and I work for the Ohio Valley Educational Cooperative, the Head Start program, and I am the behavior specialist. We also oversee the mental health of our students. So I'm excited to be here.
Thanks. Marcie, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'm Marcie Timmerman, Executive Director of Mental Health America of Kentucky and parent to Will, a first grader.
Thanks. Jill?
Sure. Hello. My name is Jill Gay. I'm the Chief Program Officer at Family Nurturing Center, which is located in Northern Kentucky in Florence. What we do here is we provide an array of prevention and treatment services for child victims of abuse, as well as adults who were victimized as children, either sexually or physically, to help them work towards holistic healing. And so I oversee those programs and clinical supervision of our staff.
Great. And DeShara?
So happy Mental Health Awareness Month to everyone. My name is DeShara Doub. I'm a high school mental health practitioner, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Vision of Promise LLC, where we specialize in counseling and consulting, and specifically around racial trauma and also grief and loss. So I'm excited to be here.
Thank you all. I think this is going to be a really great panel. So I want to start the conversation by talking about how each of you define trauma from your professional lenses, and hear from you all about like how is trauma showing up in kids or in the adults, over the past year. What are you all seeing? And anyone can jump in first.
I'd be happy to start, and then we can go from there. I think how we, as an organization, look and define trauma, we can look at that a bunch of different ways, but we really try to view it as, it can either be a single event, but unfortunately, most of what we work with is a series of events, usually from birth through adolescence, of some really scary stuff that threatens life or sense of person. It really has an overall impact on folks' sense of meaning, their sense of ability to connect, and then their overall sense of control. So the traumatic experience or the events, we can all have a bad thing happen to us, but whether it becomes traumatic is really more about how people around us respond when we disclose. It's defined by the supports that we had in place to develop resiliency to move past that. But it is really over encompassing through our spiritual nature, our psychological nature, our physical nature, and our emotional nature. So it's all encompassing. And that's a little bit of the lens that we kind of look through. I think how we have really seen that playing out for the families that we serve, and also just in our greater community here in Northern Kentucky, is, man, this last year has really perpetuated a lot of dysregulation in homes. They're very difficult circumstances where sometimes children are trapped in homes with their perpetrator daily, whereas before they were going to school systems, going to community centers, and having safe, trusted adults lean into them and offer some sense of safety. A lot of school children this past year have not been able to escape their abuser, whether that's overt or covert abuse that's going on. And so they're living in a dysregulated state on a daily basis. For children who haven't had an experience of child abuse happen to them, living in their homes where sometimes the finances were uncertain, sometimes just the nature of being stuck, creates creates dysregulation in the adults that are caring for them. And if you're anxious as a parent, caring for that child, then that anxiety starts, I call it limbic resonance, right? Your limbic system is vibrating super high. The child's system is vibrating super high because they're picking that up from you and absorbing it. And so kids are just living, in this past year because of, and to use Terry's overused phrase from that university, it's an uncertain time, and uncertainty always breeds anxiety and, our fight or flight response. And that's come in a variety of ways. So I think, in general, the severity of the abuse we're seeing that kids are coming in the door with because of that year of being trapped with abusers is vastly greater when we look at that from what we were working with a year or 2 years prior. But also we're just seeing an influx of families not being able to move back into a normal way of being with one another because they're still kind of figuring things out. So I think that's what we're seeing here.
Great, thank you, Jill. Marcie, Samantha, DeShara, I want to hear from all of you about what you all are seeing.
I would just agree with, sorry.
Okay.
I would just agree with Jill. I always tell our staff that I want Head Start to be a child's safe place. When they come into our classroom, that's their safe place. And so I've had lots of phone calls from parents who don't know how to manage the behaviors at home. They've been home a long time with kiddos and they're reaching out for help, thankfully. But I also know there are those who are not reaching out for help, and that is concerning as well. We initially knew that we would see an increase in needs and behaviors, and we have seen that. We have seen an increase. Children are needing connection. They are needing a lot more attention than we saw previously. And so we're just giving that to them and providing them with all the love and support we can at this time.
DeShara, you want to go next?
Oh, sure. I didn't want to cut anybody off, so I was just waiting around. I want to echo something that Jill said, because I think a lot of times people don't even recognize that they're in a traumatic experience because it's something that is generational. So I wanted to lift that up specifically is trauma can be overt or covert. It can be something at the very moment, or it could be something that has been occurring for an extended period of time. And so for a lot of people, and I'll specifically speak in the realm of racial trauma, because we have seen that in quite a bit of many multi-layers within the 2020-2021 year, is that a lot of people are seeing it right through the lens, through social media, through the news. But in a lot of experiences, people have been experiencing that, whether it's through a passive manner or if it's through an aggressive manner for generations and generations. And so one of the things about trauma is one, being able to even educate people on what is traumatic experiences through a clinical lens. Because I think a lot of people are like, well, we're poor. Right. Or, we've always struggled for food. Or, I've gotten my older brothers and sisters or my older cousins clothes. That hasn't been a big deal. But in the professional sense, we can see that as the beginnings of trauma, right? We can see that as something that needs a support. And so one of the things when it comes to trauma, at least through my lens, is I always think about what is the perspective of the community. I am definitely a systemic type of mental health provider. And so trying to definitely educate, but also go back and see, why do we not call this trauma? Right? Is it because this is something that unfortunately is a part of the makeup of our community? Or is it something that is a short-term or temporary situation? Unfortunately, COVID probably is going to be long-term, right? We're experiencing right now, it's something that came unexpectedly, and that is definitely a traumatic experience. It's a lot of grief and loss, not only with unfortunate passings and unexpected passings of loved ones, but people had the grief and loss of what their life looked like prior to COVID, right? So those vacations, those abilities to hug loved ones, and those are traumatic. And so I would say now the idea of trauma is so broad, and it can definitely be defined differently depending on who you're talking to and what setting you're in.
Yes to all of that. But also, I think from specifics, from a parent perspective, what I'm seeing from the kids, and I'm at home, I've had this lovely job where I get to sit literally right behind the virtual schooling that's happening. So my kiddo's screen is on the other side of my monitor here. So when we had virtual school, I really paid attention, right, to some of the classroom at times because I couldn't help myself. I'm not a therapist, by the way, folks. I am an advocate, though, in mental health, been in this space for a while, educated for 15 years, I think now is where I'm at with advocacy. So I've been around a while, so I couldn't help myself but watch, right? I saw a lot of kids needing that routine set. Every time a routine change happened, there was a lot of chaos on their side and feeling it. You could see that they were feeling that external parental chaos, the world chaos, and just changing one thing would throw them for a loop for a little while. So having a lot of grace seemed to be really important and giving them the words to explain what they were feeling. So my kid is a first grader, right? He just left first grade. Fayette County's out as of yesterday. So he'll be in the second grade. Giving them the words to explain it, but I also saw that with teens. And we see that in our mental health screenings, that a lot of teens were coming to us to understand whether they had a mental health issue or whether this was a situational thing for them. Our screenings are free online. For those who don't know, that the clinical screenings like the GAD-7, the PHQ-9. So they're legit screenings, right, for depression, for anxiety. And we saw a huge increase in the numbers, 4 times as many people. We had 16,000 screenings in 2020 in Kentucky alone. So we had millions of them nationwide. And we're seeing that across the board. Kentucky was no exception. People wanting to understand if what they were feeling was normal or not, whether grief was normal, right, those kinds of things. So I think that was just kind of giving that language, that space to talk, and also the information. I think a lot of parents didn't have that information. A lot of parents did not handle this well. I think we can all say that by, media accounts, by social media groups, other places is where I'm kind of getting that information from. So yeah, that limbic system stuff Jill was talking about is real, right? Like when parents couldn't handle it, kids can't either, and they reflect and react to that. So I think the more we do that duck on a pond thing as parents, the better. You can't be perfect, right? I'm not expecting anyone to be perfect or unreal or unauthentic, but also take that step back a little bit when you're with your kids and see if maybe you're part of the problem if they're having some behavior issues and explaining. I also feel like awkwardness is going to be the going forward our standard for a little while. We're all going to be socially awkward, right? Whether you were out there doing your thing and then suddenly only a quarter of the people you usually do your thing with are around, right? We're all going to have those moments, and explaining that, especially to teens, that we're all going to be navigating this like weirdos. It is okay to be a weirdo today. We're not going to be perfect, and the popular people are going to mess up, and just setting that expectation moving forward, I think, is going to be important. I know we had quite a bit of that when they got back to school and stuff. We all feel weird right now. We all talk too much, right? I talk too much these days. I'm an extrovert who's still working from home. I don't see people anymore. So we all have those moments. And I think realizing that, giving that authenticity and keeping that dialogue going is going to be really important. But I've really seen that going on. I've also seen people completely close off. And reminding people that connecting is going to be really important too. Find those people that are your safe people in your authentic space, whatever that might be. So if it's racial trauma you're dealing with, obviously you're going to talk to other people who are in that group, right? If you're a teen who really likes anime, maybe the anime group is where you need to be. Those kinds of things, to pick on some stereotypes. But I think that's important. And I think we need to make space for that and just recognize what's going on.
Marcie, I love that. And there's several comments in the chat. I think a lot of people feel very validated and seen by what you just said. And I think it's so important. And I kind of want to go back a little bit and pick on DeShara. Not pick on DeShara, but kind of hear a little bit more from you, specifically about the racialized trauma, because some of the things that you all were just saying about, how people respond and generational trauma and kind of giving folks the words and the validation. If we think about, the past year, the entirety of this pandemic, early on, we were seeing, this data about there being that disproportionate impact on, Black and Brown communities, and the pandemic really just compounding and highlighting pre-existing hardships. I think someone had said earlier that there was an increase in family violence, right? And living in these environments that you can't even get out of. There's community violence as well. And then, you know, on top of that, you have like these really high profile cases like George Floyd being killed, and like having access to that on like TV and social media, kind of on this endless loop. And now we're seeing like increases in, you know, violence against like Asian Americans as well. So that's a lot for an adult to process, right? So can you just talk a little bit about what you're seeing, but like, what are some things that we need to know about like how that trauma is presenting or manifesting for kids of color specifically?
Sure. And first things first, I am definitely going to shout out Dr. Stephen Nifley, who has also trained me and was one of my former classmates at the University of Louisville. He actually is very key when it comes to the statistics on racial trauma and really doing his work with Spalding University to be able to train clinicians during this time to be able to really speak specifically on this issue. So thank you very much for putting that in the chat. I want to make sure I lifted him up. But to answer your question, you know, the experiences of so many groups, you know, we're not, you know, groups are not a monolith. So I don't know if I'll be able to truly articulate every group's experience, but I will do my best to kind of give just an overall picture. But it absolutely has been trying, because think about all the things that have been going on during COVID. I mean, everything from mass deaths, right? Mass illnesses. Then you have the disproportionality of receiving medical treatment. You have a lot of people experiencing food deserts in a greater way than they did prior to COVID. I mean, it's been a lot of job loss. I mean, just so many things. We can go on and on and on. But specifically what you're talking about, think about adding all those elements on top of just the general experiences of COVID. So one thing that I want to lift up as well is our Mexican community when it came to, you know, the gelling of children. So that was something that was also made mention of, right, so kind of towards the beginning of COVID. So you have that situation that's still going on now, right? So the disconnecting, the dismantling of family. So you have that piece. Of course, the trauma within Louisville, specifically with the Breonna Taylor case. So you have that lifted up, as well as the unfortunate viewing of the killing of George Floyd, and exactly what you mentioned, the accessibility to death. The accessibility, if we think about that, how traumatic is that? When I tell you my high school kids, and I'm sure most people's kids are like this too, they have so much access. They have their phones, they have tablets, they have gaming system that's also connected to the internet. So how likely are they, even if parental controls are in place, which again can always be broken into, right? The ability to be able to watch such a traumatic event, and then the inability to be able to process that, right? So you have that piece. And then also, as you mentioned, our Pacific Islander and Asian communities and all the traumas around that as well. We also have the LGBTQ communities and all the traumas around that, and our transgender brothers and sisters that has been killed at such a disproportionate rate. So when we talk about racial trauma, I think it's important, at least for me, to really lift up the communities that have really experienced it at a very high rate. We also see now we have a lot of our brothers and sisters across the pond that are experiencing a lot of war and a lot of injustice and things of that nature. So when you think about that, it's so heavy, but that's all that not only just our communities as a whole, but our children are bringing. So one of the pieces that I experience is trying to process virtually with our high school students in the midst of the Breonna Taylor demonstrations over the summer. A lot of our children lived in proximity. They saw, they heard, right? A lot of them were in the demonstration. So they were being arrested, they were being tased, they were being gassed. So trying to really process that. So when you talk about racial trauma, you're talking about the current state of things, but then you're also talking about the generational things, right? You're talking about the injustices that unfortunately we're still experiencing today when it comes to the disproportionality of income, right? right? The differences of the ways that people are paid, the opportunities people are having within education, within employment, things of that nature. I mean, housing disparity, it's so much. And so one of the things that I think is really important is being able to keep that open line with our kiddos of saying, you know, what are some things that you're thinking about? Like, what are some things that you're seeing? What questions do you have? And again, as was mentioned before, a lot of times adults, it's so heavy for us that even trying to explain to our kiddos, it can be way too much, right? But I think the authenticity is something that is so key, because I've cried with my kiddos. We've had to take a moment, just be like, whew, this is heavy for you. I'm feeling that same heavy for me, for our community, for your family. And so I know that's, I try to condense it as much as I can, but it's just so much to unpack when it comes to racial trauma. But I think that so many marginalized communities have definitely seen an increase on multiple levels during COVID. And so I can definitely see not only the effects of the health piece of the pandemic, but also the racial pieces, the injustice pieces of the pandemic is something that unfortunately we're going to have to deal with for years and years to come.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, I think everything that you're saying is so important. And I know that it's difficult to kind of like distill that, but thank you for sharing it. And I totally agree with you. I think that I love that you said that it's just heavy, because it is it's a lot for anyone to carry, and to kind of shift into talking more about like how we can mitigate that. We always hear about like how resilient kids are and, or young people are, and they really are. But I will fully admit that there's like always a small part of me that kind of feels like, oh, they shouldn't have to be, like they shouldn't have to carry such heavy experiences at such young ages. So I just want to hear from all of you. Now we can kind of open it up. How do we effectively mitigate that trauma and kind of start to build that resilience? What does that look like? Anyone can jump in.
Well, I'll go ahead and start first, I guess. One of the pieces is definitely ensuring that resources are in place. I think that's like just foundationally. So really determining what are their areas of support. And a lot of communities have a very much of a village mentality. So it's the neighbor, it's the, community pastor, it's, the community center that's being able to route up to ensure that those kiddos are supported. So I definitely think just foundationally, really assessing what the levels of support is. When it comes to the educational setting, I think one of the things that are really key is really linking support staffs within schools. So you're talking about the family resource and youth service center coordinators, which I want to shout out because they have been dealing with quite a bit during this pandemic as well. Mental health practitioners, school social workers, your school counselors. ECE is one that a lot of people don't talk about a whole lot too. So really gathering and making sure that the resources are available and it's accurate. Because one of the things that I have found during this time, as well as unfortunately a lot of the listings that we've had of like who is available, who's accepting clients, who has resources that they can give out for free, such as like Dare to Care and things like that. There are places that have really been affected during the pandemic. And so making sure that we really have the village mentality and really work in a collective to make sure that those resources are available, not only while the kiddos are in school, but also when they go back home to the communities that they're a part of as well. So I'll say foundationally, and then my colleagues can go ahead and take it away from there.
I'll go next. Are you okay, Jill, with that? You can go. Okay. So in Head Start, we're training our staff on conscious discipline. And I've been in the field for more than 20 years, and I have never loved anything more than conscious discipline. So conscious discipline promotes safety, problem solving, and connection is the biggest thing. Conscious discipline was created by Dr. Becky Bailey, and she teaches the brain states. And that's been so helpful for our staff to understand the brain states. She teaches on the survival state, the emotional state, and the executive state of functioning. And, just for our staff to hear that this, there are some kiddos in our classrooms who are functioning in the survival state of their brain, where those are your kids who are fight or flight. We have other kids who are functioning at the emotional state of their brain where, they may appear very upset. They may come in very upset. And those kids are just needing connection. And the ultimate goal of conscious discipline is obviously to get kids functioning in the executive state of their brain. And that's where they can learn and they can problem solve on their own. So myself and the other behavior specialists here sat down and decided what out of conscious discipline that we wanted to use in our classrooms. We would love to use it all, but we also didn't want to overwhelm our staff because they have a lot to do with curriculum and keeping kids safe and that kind of thing. So in our early Head Start classrooms, we have early Head Start, and child care partnerships. And so in our early Head Start classrooms and child care partnerships, we use the conscious discipline language. It's a lot of when kids are upset, you are at school, you are safe, you are a lot of positive affirmation, that kind of thing. We use baby doll circle time, which we absolutely love and the kids love it. They all each have a baby doll that they care for. They sing songs. It just builds compassion and empathy. And I've never seen it, a classroom where the kids do not love it. Absolutely love it. We also ask our teachers to have a family wall where our kiddos can bring in pictures of what their family looks like. And it just builds connection from school to home. And it doesn't matter how many times I'm in the classroom, they take me to that wall and show me, this is my family, this is so-and-so. They absolutely love it. And then also in our early Head Start classrooms, we have a safe place. And Dr. Becky Bailey believes the safest place for a child under 3 is on the caregiver's lap. And we do promote that as well. We want our children to be loved and held and that connection. But we have a spot in the classroom that's cozy, that you can take them there and talk about why they're upset and that kind of thing. In our Head Start classrooms, we use the language, but we've added a few extra things in our Head Start classrooms. We have a greeting ritual, and the kids absolutely love this. When they come into the classroom every day, this just builds connection and starts their day off positive. They get to choose their greeting. So do you want to hug today? Do you want to dance? How do you want to be greeted in the morning when you get to school? And this just starts their day off so positive. They absolutely love it. We also have a safekeeper box, and this teaches some responsibility. So every day they put their name in the safekeeper box and they tell the staff how they're going to keep it safe in the classroom. And they can absolutely do this at 2 and 3 years old. I mean, they blow me away with, I'm going to use my walking feet in the classroom today, or I'm not going to hit so-and-so with a block today, those kind of things. We also teach breathing techniques. So when our kiddos are upset, we walk them through calming down with breathing techniques. We have the pinwheel and the flower, where you smell the flower, blow the pinwheel. We have where we teach them to blow up a balloon, breathe in and deflate. They absolutely love those as well. And we try to keep a picture of those in our safe places so they can do that independently when they learn it. We also like to, our kiddos at 3 obviously they don't always know how to problem solve. So we like to give them some visuals of, this is how we could solve the problem. We can share, we can set the timer, those kind of things. And so it just teaches them, oh, there's lots of options for problem solving. We don't have to do it this certain way. We can choose how we want to work things out in the classroom. We also do a wish you well, which they absolutely love. So if a kiddo is absent that day or a kiddo has moved away, they sing a little wish you well song to think about the kiddo who's not present at school. And they come up with all kinds of creative ideas why they think the kid is absent from school, but they love wishing them well. And then they'll place their picture in a little heart and think about them throughout the day as they're not at school. And also, obviously in our Head Start classrooms, we also have a safe place. We go there with kids, but we also have kiddos who have learned to go there independently. And that's what we want. We want to teach them that this is where you can go if you want to just sit down by yourself, or if you need a minute to calm down. And then we go over and check on them. So just teaching that problem solving, safety, connection is how we're trying to start out in early childhood. And like I said, I love conscious discipline. It's the program, the best program I've seen in a long time. So
Yeah, I love that, Samantha. Like, I feel like we could probably fill the rest of this time just talking about conscious discipline, learning about that. So thank you. Jill or Marcie?
I can share. Both DeShara and Samantha did such a beautiful job of some of the overarching points I was going to speak to. You know, we really believe that all of us come through healing over difficult times through a shared system. And so, you know, service providers cannot be the holder of the key. Family members, caregivers cannot be the only people. School personnel can't be the only group. So it really takes an overarching system where our school personnel, our service providers, and our caregivers, whoever that safe, trusted adult is, are working systemically together. And I'm a big believer that language and the way we talk about something really breeds our culture and benefits our culture. And so it really requires a teaching that our school personnel, our service providers, and our caregivers are all using the same language to describe something. So it requires that overarching trauma responsive care language and how we view behavior, how we understand behavior, how we're a curious observer about behavior, to look for, you know, what unmet need is this child trying to tell me about right now? And what do they need so that we can meet that need? Because we can't consequence or punish the trauma response out of a child. We have to meet the need. And that's why conscious discipline, Samantha was referring to, is such a beautiful gift to a lot of environments, because it does really speak to that principle. We kind of operate out at the Family Nurturing Center out of a trauma responsive model that looks at key factors for resilience. So the first one is voice, choice, and control. So Samantha gave a lot of really beautiful examples of how those school classrooms are giving voice, choice, and control to kiddos from how they want to be greeted, how they want to participate, how they want to demonstrate their self-efficacy for the day. And that's really a key factor in promoting resilience. The second part of that is promoting self-esteem, but we look at self-esteem as the totality of a sense of self, a sense of self-worth, but also a sense of self-efficacy. Do I have the belief in my ability to accomplish something? And those are kind of those total pictures. In addition to that, some of those other key factors that we look at are external supports. You know, who am I going to rely on as my system of family? And family is really widely defined for children because it's the people who care for them. And then affiliation. You know, Samantha and some of her examples, and DeShara as well, spoke about helping kids affiliate. Marcie mentioned that in terms of groups of kids, you know, and how do they identify themselves? And gosh, for teenagers, that changes week to week and sometimes day to day, and allowing them the safety to explore that well. So having an affiliation with a group is extremely important to resilience. Kind of who's your tribe, and how do you start to navigate that, and allowing our family systems, our service provider systems, and our school systems in order to support affiliation. And then lastly, positive, safe adults. You know, how do we have positive, safe, trusted adults in a child's life, but also in an adult's life? We need those folks helping us day to day to be able to move through that. And so those are kind of those overarching elements without getting into much of the weeds of what we do here to promote that as a service provider, but really having shared ways. You know, I love all of those things Samantha's talking about for school systems, because those are some of the things we're trying to work with our school systems for the kiddos that we serve here in trauma therapy, is to really provide that information. And we see more and more school systems here locally moving towards that direction, or having that understanding, or looking for really creative ways to do that well. So it's really been a positive year where I feel like that system of care, particularly here, is starting to come together with some of that shared understanding.
And just to kind of summarize and bring us back to the big picture, maybe, I love what you all have said, and I love hearing more things being done in the schools. I think I don't hear enough of that, so thank you all for that. But I think also creating that trauma-informed community piece is going to be important for all of us with resilience. That being able to ask the questions, right? What happened to you? Instead of why you like that, right? Explaining and changing that, and making it okay to talk about mental health. And I think Governor Beshear tried to do that very early in the pandemic. And I think that he has clearly erased some barriers, but there's a lot of stigma around mental illness, right? But being able to ask questions and make that a topic of conversation, creating a safe place for that. I think giving people the tools to know what to do if there is a problem that needs more serious help, right? We offer mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid virtually and in person. Those may not be the end all be all, but they're a good place to start if folks need them. There's definitely community building, as we have been talking about, right? Making those groups, making those connections, offering support spaces, offering Zoom meetings for people is something that we all need to be doing. Like if you know have the technology and the ability to do it, and so does the rest of the group, then let's make it happen, right? Let's get together in some way, whatever works for you. I think also being able to know when it is time to get that expert help is going to be important for resilience moving forward, is knowing that we can't all just buck it up and get through it. We've all experienced trauma in different ways. And we've all got different levels of trauma from different things that have happened. So recognizing that, kind of what DeShara was saying before, with all the different groups, with all the layers, right? Like some people are fine with all that heavy. Not fine, but right, not as severe as some other people. Fine's the wrong word. But some of them can function better, right? And are more resilient than others. And now I'm realizing that's okay. That's not a deficit if you need help. And knowing to do that through either our screenings or DIY tools that we have on our website, or maybe it's time to see a mental health professional. And going there is not the end all be all, and it doesn't mean you have to go forever, right? Necessarily. So just kind of recognizing that recovery can happen for all of us, that resilience is something that we work on, and we're not always built. It's not innate, right? It's not part of humanity to just automatically be resilient. It's something we all have to engage in. I think that's really important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I think I'd heard somebody before had said, like we need to normalize not necessarily the trauma, but like having those conversations about what is causing the trauma. And I hear that a lot in what you all are saying as well. Like, we need to normalize that, normalize seeking help, and then, connection as well. I feel like in different ways, you all have said the same thing. So, it's really helpful. I feel like we could go on for like another hour. So I want to shift gears a little bit while we still have a few minutes. At KYA, much of the work that we do is really focused on policy advocacy and change. So again, from your perspectives, and I know that this is a huge question, are there any state, federal, or even local policies that you all think are needed to help address this issue, systemically in some way? I know that there's always opportunities for like budget investments. Is there anything there that you think that could be allocated that could help? Like what do you all think on that particular level would be helpful?
I'll go first if that's okay, everybody.
Yeah.
I have a list a mile long, but I'll make it short. I think we need to invest in mental health in our schools. I think we need to do a better job of hiring school counselors for every single school to start. That's a basic level. I think we need mental health professionals available in the schools. Maybe not every school needs to have a school psychologist or social worker or LCSW, but most of them do. And I bet if we had them, we'd find they all really do need them. I really think that that's an investment level that is a basic line. If we're going to say we care about our kids in Kentucky, that is a very basic line for us to meet. I also think that we need to work on IEP services for people with behavioral health system issues. That is a national deficit that we have, is understanding and putting in place those supports for those kids that have behavioral problems, creating those environments like Samantha was talking about, making that a policy that we are, talking about social emotional learning on a much individual level as well as on a system level. I also think we need to fund things like our safety net. Our community mental health centers have to fight every single year just to keep their pension deficit low. I can't imagine what it's like, what we could do with all that energy if we didn't have to fight about the pension every single year. What kind of innovative strategies could we come up with on our safety net? And what kind of things could they reopen if we started funding them at the level they're supposed to? They haven't had a raise in 23 or more years, y'all. So investment in our mental health system and investment in that across the state. And I'll kind of leave it at that. I think those are some good points to start with.
No, Marcie, I love that because I was going to lift up Senate Bill 1. Senate Bill 1 is one of the reasons why, at least in Jefferson County, there are mental health practitioners. So I'll say definitely expanding that. but Marcie hit the nail on the head, definitely increasing pay, because that is one of the pieces that I think a lot of people don't consider. When you are looking at someone that has a mental health licensure, right, you have to consider supervision. You have to consider continuing education units, which, depending on what mode of environment that you're in, sometimes they support that, sometimes they don't. Right. You're also talking about renewals every year. And there are specific trainings that are so crucial and beneficial when you're working with children. The trauma-informed care training, that is huge. I will even say mental health first aid is huge. I mean, there's so many trainings that can really be beneficial, specifically when it comes to working with children. And unfortunately, Kentucky is #1 for child abuse, and really expanding that policy around that. Like, what are the levels of advocacy that can happen? We have so much when it comes to like the age of consent. And I think that that's something also to consider. That is a very big barrier when it comes to working with youth. If they are telling you that they're experiencing some type of abuse, a lot of times, depending on their age, you have to speak with an adult, you have to get permissions in order to do that. It's a lot of layers, and a lot of times there are kiddos that just have to stay in that environment because of the advocacy pieces and their age. And so I think that definitely really expanding that Senate Bill 1 piece when it comes to the training and the pay or compensation for mental health providers. And I'll lift up not only our social workers, our school psychologists, counselors, marriage and family therapists, all of those embody who are in the schools. And so I think that that definitely needs to be considered, as well as the holistic of what a mental health team needs to look like, and have that in every school, because some providers are really stretched between multiple schools. And so definitely having some intentionality on that one school and being able to fund and support that.
I think I'll just add a little bit to what both of these ladies did a beautiful job of explaining is, I choose to work within the organization I work for. As I was a baby therapist years ago in a variety of different organizations, and have kind of chosen to be here and my career for the last 10 years. And the primary reason is that we operate within a way that gives me the freedom to do good work based in that construct of trauma-informed care. And not to kind of beat a soapbox of mine, but our system within the mental health world of diagnosing and managed care and payment for what's billable and what's not billable really calls mental health professionals to choose not to do good work over being able to sustain their careers and their livelihoods. And so our organization chose not to do third-party billing, and we really rely on grants and contracts to be able to deliver service free of charge. And it allows us a little bit more freedom and flexibility with how creative we can be with going to school and doing some observations and meeting with staff to create a team, making sure we pull caregivers and siblings and safe supported adults into our system without having to worry about, is my reimbursement going to help me with that? So whatever federal systemic changes can happen to not take away that system altogether, because there are pure reasons for that and benefits to it, but allow an expansion of the rules and regulations to create a better way of doing outside of the box, creative, holistic care for children and families is really going to be a step in the right direction.
Great. Samantha, were you going to say anything?
I was going to say amen to everything these ladies said. Yes, absolutely. Jill said something earlier that really made me reflect on you can't punish trauma. And I always say that. And I think it's going to take a real push for Senate Bill 1 and a real mindset change with having mental health professionals in the school system, because currently most of our districts operate on a reward-based system. So you have a lot of clip up and down system. You have, I don't want to name any current, programs, but there's a lot of, if you do good works, then you can get this prize. And some of our kids just do not have the ability to perform at that level. And so they're getting punished for things that are outside of their control. And so instead, what we need to be doing is going back to the basics and teaching those skills to our kids. And until we have the right people in place in the school system, until they see mental health as valuable, social workers, psychologists, those kind of things inside the school system. We're just not going to get there. We're going to continue on the same, I call it insanity, because we're doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, and we're not getting the result we want. And that's why, like I said before, with conscious discipline, I love it so much, because it's just a positive connection, problem solving. It's a teaching program. If a child has a deficit, we're going to teach that skill. We're going to teach them how they can be at optimal functioning. And that's where we need to get to in our districts. Our kids spend a lot of time at school. And so we need our districts to be promoting mental health, definitely.
Great. All right. So final question for each of you. We like to end each of our forums with, takeaways or action items. So what's one thing that you want advocates to take away from this discussion, or if there's something specific that you think that they can do? What's the one takeaway? And anyone can start.
If you don't mind, do you care if I go? I actually have an adult participant coming right at 11 for their session. So if you see me drop off, I'm going to apologize up front. I would love to hang out here as long as I could. But just really quickly for advocates, being willing to ask the question when people are talking, I have this little, I think, physical response when I hear people talk about behaviors, and I hear people talk about like behavior modification in its purest form. And I think as advocates, if we can start to use language like, I wonder what Susie's trying to tell us. I'm wondering how that behavior helps her feel safe. Because while that behavior might seem outside of, the understanding of the person who's frustrated with the behavior, no child wakes up in the morning bent on running someone's day. They're using behaviors throughout the course of the day to help their bodies start to feel safe in their environment. And that goes for traumatized kids as well as untraumatized kids. So having advocates really understand that concept of being a curious observer and helping the people in their conversation space to be curious observers. And I think, we have to start to see behavior as more of something to be controlled, but understanding it as a communication tool that children have at their disposal, and advocate for holistic approaches to support quality training for service providers, for family members, for school personnel, supervision, quality trauma-informed supervision, looking at how do we care for ourselves during the provision of the service. Sometimes we magnify the problem and we say, an adult male with an ACE score or adverse childhood experiences score of 6 is multiple times more likely to be an IV drug user. And then the people who work with them, we say, well, at the end of a hard day, go home and take a bubble bath. And we minimize the solution to the secondary trauma that as teachers, as parents, as providers, that we experience bearing witness to others' pain. There's ways to learn to care for yourself. One of the models we teach our staff here is called CSERT, about learning how to care for yourself in the moment of the provision of service, so you don't jam pack all that stress on you when you get home, and then you take it out on your pets, your family members, or you completely disconnect, which sets us up to be non-resilient as the people caring. So learning to advocate for those processes, the funding for those things, the supports within your agency to do the right thing over the easy thing every single time, those are the huge pieces that we can have advocates do that will encompass that overall system of care.
Thanks, Jill. And thank you for joining us too, if you have to hop off. Thanks. Anyone else? DeShara, Marcie, Samantha, just one takeaway?
Yeah, it is not okay. It is okay to not be okay. Like, it is okay to not be okay, whether you are a child all the way up to what I call a well-seasoned citizen. I think it's so important that we need to recognize that it is nothing wrong with needing that extra layer of support. I think a lot of times we get in situations where, there's stigma, or you're a mental health professional. What does it look like for me to need a mental health professional? Or, it's still a lot of stigma, as much as mental health has been something that people have embraced more during this time. I think it still is a lot of people that still has shame around that. So being able to seek out those professionals, know that you have agency when it comes to those professionals. So, whether it's, yes, I do need to talk specifically about my trauma, or I'm a woman that has dealt with abuse and I would like to really tap into that. There are so many providers that can provide so many types of resources. And so I think it's really key. Don't walk around with the trauma for generations and generations. What you're experiencing, everyone in your household is experiencing. That secondary trauma, that is real. And it's not only the way that you vocalize, but it's the way and also the energy that you carry into spaces. And so definitely just making it a priority to take care of yourself and recognize that you are worth it. It is not selfish. Self-care is not selfish. That's what my takeaway would be.
That's great. Thank you, DeShara.
What a
Marcie.
great one, DeShara, because you just covered most of our toolkit for this year. So dealing with anger, frustration, taking time for yourself, recognizing things. I mean, I can't talk enough about how it is okay to not be okay. That's a big line. And there's actually an app for that, y'all. It's called that. So go out and get it. I really think also recognizing that the system and the things that are in place don't have to stay that way. Getting involved, getting to be an advocate, sign up for emails, get involved in the conversation, start the conversation if it's not being happened about things that you're seeing that are wrong or not working well for you and your community especially. I think we're seeing those things in more stark contrast than ever before. But yeah, also remember not to give so much of yourself that you don't have more of yourself for tomorrow, right? So that's that self-care piece. But yeah, I think it's just really important to make sure that we all recognize that we have the ability to change the world individually, and that there are other groups out there to help you do that. If you don't know how to do that right now, reach out. I'm always here for that kind of conversation.
All right. I didn't know if Samantha was going to jump in, because we can close up if you're not.
I was just going to say that I love everything everybody said. And I think especially with younger kids, we get so hyper-focused on behavior and discipline and consequences, and forget to stop and consider, what does this child need in this moment? And so I love, what Jill said earlier, and that's my takeaway, is just considering each child individually and what their needs are, and just loving and supporting them through everything. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. This was such a great conversation. So I am going to turn it over now to my colleague, Carly Mosby Smith, who is going to close us out.
Thanks, Courtney. And thanks again to our panelists. This has been so very insightful, and we really appreciate you all sharing your expertise with us this morning. We also want to thank our partners at Aetna Better Health of Kentucky for their support of today's Advocate Virtual Forum. Looking ahead to some upcoming forums that we have, next week we'll be discussing teens in foster care, and we have a really great lineup of panelists for that forum as well. And then we'll be skipping the following week because it's a holiday week. And so when we resume on June 9th, we'll be discussing schools' trauma-informed plans that we've talked a little bit about, that are a result of Senate Bill 1 from 2019. So we'll talk a little bit about that on June 9th. As always, the follow-up email will include a recording of today's forum, as well as the many resources that our panelists shared. So that will be included as well as a link to sign up for next week's forum. So thanks again for joining us, and we hope you all have a great rest of your day.